Palace Guard Story. First part. Marcus had been working as a palace guard for 12 years. Every morning he walked through the same golden hallways, checked the same doors, and watched the same royal family members go about their daily lives. The job was steady, but it had become routine. He knew every corner of the palace, every secret passage, and every room that visitors never saw. The palace was huge, with over 300 rooms spread across 4 floors. Marcus worked the night shift, which meant he patrolled the building when most people were sleeping. He carried a heavy set of keys that opened almost every door in the palace. The only rooms he couldn't enter were the private suites of the royal family members. Prince Alexander lived in the east wing of the palace. His suite took up an entire floor and had 12 rooms, including a private dining room, library, bedroom, and sitting area. The prince was known for his expensive taste. He collected rare art, fine wines, and expensive jewelry. Everyone in the palace knew that his rooms were filled with valuable items. Marcus had always been curious about what the prince kept in his private suite. During his patrols, he would sometimes walk past the prince's door and wonder what treasures lay behind it. But he never thought about actually going inside. That would be against all the rules. And Marcus was a man who followed rules. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday night in November. Marcus was doing his usual patrol when he heard strange noises coming from the prince's suite. It sounded like someone was moving furniture around, which was odd because it was past midnight. The prince usually went to bed early and never made noise late at night. Marcus stopped outside the suite door and listened carefully. The sounds continued for several minutes. There was definitely someone inside moving heavy objects. Marcus knew the prince had gone to bed hours ago because he had seen him enter his suite at 10 o'clock. So who was making all this noise? As head of the night security team, Marcus felt it was his duty to investigate. He knocked gently on the door and called out, "Your Highness, is everything all right?" There was no answer, but the sounds stopped immediately. Marcus waited for a few minutes, then knocked again. Still no response. Marcus tried the door handle and was surprised to find it unlocked. This was very unusual because the prince always locked his door at night. Security protocols required all royal family members to keep their doors locked after 10 in the evening. Something was definitely wrong. Marcus pushed the door open slightly and called out again. "Your Highness? Security check." The room was dark, but he could see that furniture had been moved around. Chairs were out of place, and there were boxes scattered on the floor. Marcus turned on his flashlight and stepped inside. The prince's main sitting room looked like someone had been searching for something. Expensive paintings hung crooked on the walls, and several drawers were pulled open. Marcus's heart started beating faster. Had someone broken into the prince's suite? Was there a burglar in the palace? Marcus reached for his radio to call for backup, but then he heard a voice from the next room. It was Prince Alexander, and he was talking to someone. Marcus couldn't make out the words, but the prince sounded upset. Marcus moved closer to listen, staying in the shadows. Through the partially open door, Marcus could see into the prince's private study. Prince Alexander was there with 2 other men that Marcus didn't recognize. They weren't palace staff or royal guards. One was a tall man with gray hair wearing an expensive suit. The other was younger and had a large bag at his feet. The prince was holding something small and shiny in his hands. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell it was jewelry. The prince seemed nervous as he handed the item to the gray-haired man, who examined it carefully with a small magnifying glass. "This is definitely authentic," the gray-haired man said in a quiet voice. "The craftsmanship is exactly what we would expect from the royal collection of that era." Marcus felt confused. What royal collection were they talking about? And why were strangers in the prince's suite in the middle of the night, looking at jewelry? The younger man opened his bag and pulled out several small boxes. Marcus watched as the prince carefully placed more jewelry items into these boxes. There were rings, necklaces, and what looked like a small crown or tiara. Each piece sparkled in the lamplight. Marcus had never seen such beautiful jewelry before. The pieces looked old and very expensive. Some of the gems were larger than anything he had ever seen, and the gold work was incredibly detailed. These weren't just expensive pieces of jewelry. They looked like they belonged in a museum. "Are you sure about this?" Prince Alexander asked the gray-haired man. "Once these leave the palace, there's no going back." The gray-haired man nodded. "The buyer is very serious and has been waiting for months. These pieces will be well cared for, and you'll receive full payment within the week." Marcus realized he was witnessing something he shouldn't be seeing. The prince was selling jewelry, but why in the middle of the night with strangers? And why did he look so nervous about it? As Marcus watched, the prince pulled out a large wooden box from behind his desk. The box looked very old and had intricate carvings on the lid. When the prince opened it, Marcus could see it was lined with red velvet and contained even more jewelry pieces. "These are the most valuable items," the prince said quietly. "They belong to my grandmother, the former queen. She passed away 5 years ago and left them to me in her will." The gray-haired man's eyes grew wide as he looked at the contents of the box. "These are magnificent. The historical value alone makes them priceless. The buyer will be very pleased." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The former queen had been beloved by the people of the country. She was known for her charity work and her beautiful jewelry collection, which she often wore to public events. When she died, everyone assumed her jewelry had become part of the official royal collection. But here was Prince Alexander, secretly selling these precious items to mysterious strangers in the middle of the night. Marcus didn't understand why the prince would need to sell his grandmother's jewelry. The royal family was wealthy, and Prince Alexander received a large allowance from the government. The younger man finished packing the jewelry into his bag and handed the prince a thick envelope. "This is half the payment as agreed. You'll receive the rest when the items are safely delivered to the buyer." Prince Alexander took the envelope without counting the contents. He looked sad as he watched the men prepare to leave with his grandmother's jewelry. "I want you to know this isn't easy for me. These pieces have been in my family for generations." The gray-haired man put his hand on the prince's shoulder. "I understand completely. Sometimes circumstances force us to make difficult decisions. The buyer is a private collector who truly appreciates the historical significance of these pieces." Marcus was torn between his duty as a security guard and his loyalty to the royal family. Should he report what he was seeing? Was the prince doing anything illegal? The jewelry belonged to him, so he had the right to sell it. But something about this secret nighttime meeting felt wrong. As the two strangers prepared to leave, Marcus quickly backed away from the door. He needed to get out of the suite before they discovered him. But as he turned to leave, his foot hit a small table, causing a vase to wobble. The noise was slight, but in the quiet of the night, it sounded loud. Marcus froze as he heard footsteps approaching the sitting room. He had nowhere to hide and no good excuse for being in the prince's private suite. Prince Alexander appeared in the doorway, his face pale with shock when he saw Marcus standing there. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The prince's eyes showed fear, surprise, and something else that Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Marcus," the prince said quietly, "how long have you been here?" Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He had been caught in a situation that could end his career and possibly put him in serious trouble, but he also felt that he had stumbled upon something important, something that the people of the country might need to know about. The two strangers appeared behind the prince, looking nervous and angry. The younger man still clutched his bag tightly, while the gray-haired man studied Marcus with calculating eyes. "Who is this?" the gray-haired man asked. "He's one of our security guards," Prince Alexander replied, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "Marcus, I can explain everything." But Marcus wasn't sure he wanted an explanation. What he had witnessed tonight, would change everything he thought he knew about the royal family and his job at the palace. The former queen's jewelry was supposed to be a symbol of the country's heritage, not something to be sold secretly to private collectors. As Marcus looked at the prince's guilty expression and the nervous strangers, he realized that he had discovered something much bigger than a simple jewelry sale. There were questions that needed answers, and Marcus was the only one who could find them. The prince stepped closer to Marcus, his voice urgent and pleading. "You don't understand the full situation. I need you to trust me on this." But trust was something that Marcus wasn't sure he could give anymore, not when the former queen's precious jewelry was being sold in secret, and not when the prince looked so guilty about the whole situation. Marcus knew that whatever happened next would change his life forever. He had to decide whether to keep quiet about what he had seen or to report it to his supervisors. Either choice would have serious consequences, but doing nothing was no longer an option. The night that had started as a routine patrol had become the most important moment of Marcus's career. As he stood face to face with Prince Alexander and the two mysterious strangers, Marcus realized that he held the power to either protect the royal family's secrets or expose them to the world. Whatever he decided to do next would determine not only his own future, but also the fate of the former queen's precious legacy and the reputation of the royal family itself. Palace Guard Story. Second part. Marcus stood in the prince's suite, his mind racing as he tried to process everything he had witnessed. The silence in the room was heavy and uncomfortable. Prince Alexander looked pale and worried, while the two strangers seemed ready to leave as quickly as possible. "We should go," the younger man whispered to his companion, clutching the bag of jewelry tighter. "This complicates things." But the gray-haired man raised his hand to stop him. "Let's hear what the prince has to say first." He turned to Prince Alexander with a serious expression. "How do you want to handle this situation?" Prince Alexander ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Marcus had seen him make many times when he was stressed. "Marcus is trustworthy. He's been working here for 12 years without a single problem." The prince looked directly at Marcus. "I need to explain why this is happening." Marcus found his voice finally. "Your Highness, I was just doing my security rounds when I heard noises. I was concerned for your safety." He paused, then added, "I didn't expect to find you conducting business at this hour." The prince nodded and gestured for everyone to sit down. The strangers remained standing near the door, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Prince Alexander sat heavily in his favorite chair, the one his grandmother had given him years ago. "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you must remain confidential," the prince began. "My family is facing financial difficulties that the public doesn't know about. The government has reduced our funding significantly over the past 2 years." This news surprised Marcus. The royal family always appeared wealthy and never seemed to worry about money. Their public appearances showed them wearing expensive clothes and living in luxury. "The maintenance costs for this palace alone are enormous," Prince Alexander continued. "The heating bills, staff salaries, security systems, and building repairs cost millions every year. We've had to make difficult decisions about which expenses to cut." Marcus thought about this revelation. He had noticed that fewer palace staff were working lately. Some positions hadn't been filled when people retired or left for other jobs. He had assumed this was just normal staff turnover, not a sign of financial problems. "But why sell your grandmother's jewelry?" Marcus asked. "Surely there are other options." The prince's face grew sad. "My grandmother left me specific instructions in her will. She told me that if the family ever faced serious financial difficulties, I should use her jewelry to help us through the crisis. She said the pieces were valuable, but that family survival was more important than keeping expensive objects." The gray-haired man stepped forward. "If I may explain, I'm an antique jewelry specialist. Prince Alexander contacted me several months ago after exhausting other options. We've been working together to find appropriate buyers for these pieces. Marcus felt somewhat relieved to learn that this wasn't a simple robbery or theft, but he still had questions about why everything was being done so secretly. "Why not sell them through proper auction houses?" Marcus asked. "Wouldn't that be more official and bring better prices?" The younger man finally spoke up. "Public auctions would create media attention. If people knew the royal family was selling the former queen's jewelry, it would cause a scandal. The public doesn't know about the financial situation." Prince Alexander nodded. "The government has asked us to keep our financial problems private. They're worried that public knowledge of our difficulties might affect tourism and the country's image. Many people visit our country specifically to see the royal palaces and ceremonies." Marcus began to understand the complicated situation. The royal family was caught between their need for money and their responsibility to maintain public confidence. Selling the jewelry privately allowed them to solve their financial problems without creating a public relations disaster. "Who is buying these pieces?" Marcus asked. The gray-haired man answered carefully. "A private collector who lives overseas. He specializes in European royal jewelry and has an excellent reputation. The pieces will be well preserved and cared for. He's not buying them to resell for profit, but to add to his personal collection." Marcus felt slightly better knowing the jewelry would be preserved rather than broken apart and sold separately. But he still wondered if this was the right solution to the family's problems. "Have you considered other options?" Marcus asked the prince. "Perhaps selling some of the less important artwork or furniture?" Prince Alexander smiled sadly. "We've already sold several paintings and some furniture. My grandmother's jewelry represents our last major asset. After this sale, we'll need to find other ways to reduce expenses." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Marcus immediately recognized the pattern of the steps. It was James, another palace guard who sometimes did extra patrols during busy periods. Everyone in the room tensed as the footsteps approached the door. Marcus knew that James would be suspicious if he found the prince's door open and strangers in the suite. The situation would become much more complicated if another guard discovered what was happening. Marcus made a quick decision. "Stay here and keep quiet," he whispered to everyone. He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. "James," Marcus called out as his colleague approached. "Everything okay on your rounds?" James looked surprised to see Marcus. "I heard voices coming from this area. Just checking to make sure everything's secure." Marcus nodded casually. "The prince had some phone calls earlier. International business, you know how it is. Different time zones mean he sometimes has late-night meetings." James accepted this explanation and continued on his patrol. Marcus waited until his footsteps faded before returning to the prince's suite. Everyone inside looked relieved that the interruption had been handled smoothly. "Thank you," Prince Alexander said quietly. "You could have easily told him what was really happening." Marcus realized that by covering for the prince, he had already chosen to keep the secret. He was now part of the conspiracy, whether he had intended to be or not. The gray-haired man looked at his watch. "We should complete our business and leave. The longer we stay, the greater the risk of discovery." Prince Alexander went back to his desk and pulled out a few more jewelry pieces that hadn't been packed yet. Marcus watched as beautiful rings, earrings, and a stunning pearl necklace were carefully placed into protective boxes. "This necklace was my grandmother's favorite," the prince said, holding up a string of perfectly matched pearls. "She wore it to every important state dinner for 30 years. Marcus could see how difficult this was for the prince. Each piece of jewelry held memories and family history. Selling them meant losing a connection to his grandmother and the royal family's past. The younger man finished packing the final pieces and sealed his bag carefully. "The transaction is complete. You should receive the remaining payment within 5 days. Prince Alexander shook hands with both men. I appreciate your discretion and professionalism. I hope these pieces bring your client much happiness. After the strangers left, Marcus and Prince Alexander were alone in the suite. The prince sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. Marcus could see the stress and sadness in his posture. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" Marcus asked gently. Prince Alexander looked up with tired eyes. "I never imagined I would have to sell my grandmother's jewelry to keep this palace running. She would understand, but it still feels like I'm betraying her memory." Marcus sat down across from the prince. "From what you've told me, it sounds like you're honoring her wishes. She left those pieces to help the family, and that's exactly what you're doing." The prince managed a small smile. "Thank you for understanding, Marcus. And thank you for not reporting this immediately. I know it puts you in a difficult position." Marcus realized that the prince was right. As a palace guard, he had a duty to report unusual activities. But he also felt loyalty to the royal family and could see that Prince Alexander was trying to solve a serious problem responsibly. "What will you do if you need more money in the future?" Marcus asked. Prince Alexander sighed. "We're working with financial advisors to find long-term solutions. We might have to close parts of the palace to the public temporarily, or reduce the number of official ceremonies we host. The government is also considering increasing our funding if the economy improves." Marcus thought about the implications of these potential changes. The palace employed hundreds of people, from guards like himself to cleaning staff, tour guides, and maintenance workers. Financial difficulties could mean job losses for many families. "Will you have to reduce the security staff?" Marcus asked, worried about his own job. "We're trying to avoid cutting security," the prince replied. "Safety is too important to compromise. We'll look for savings in other areas first." As they talked, Marcus realized how little he had known about the challenges facing the royal family. From the outside, they appeared to live lives of luxury and ease, but the reality was much more complicated, with enormous responsibilities and financial pressures. The prince stood up and began straightening the furniture that had been moved during the jewelry transaction. Marcus helped him return the room to its normal appearance. "Marcus, I need to ask you to keep everything you've seen and heard tonight completely confidential," Prince Alexander said. "The future of this palace and everyone who works here depends on handling our financial situation carefully." Marcus nodded. "I understand, Your Highness. You can count on my discretion." As Marcus prepared to leave the suite and continue his patrol, he realized that his relationship with the royal family had changed permanently. He was no longer just a guard protecting the palace. He was now a keeper of important family secrets. The remainder of his shift passed quietly, but Marcus couldn't stop thinking about everything he had learned. The former queen's beautiful jewelry was now on its way to a private collector, sold to help preserve the palace and protect the jobs of everyone who worked there. When Marcus finally went home that morning, he felt the weight of the secret he now carried. He had discovered hidden jewels said to belong to the former queen, but the real discovery was learning about the private struggles of a royal family trying to preserve their heritage while facing modern financial realities. Palace Guard Story. Third part. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus discovered Prince Alexander selling the former queen's jewelry. During this time, Marcus went about his regular duties, but his mind often returned to that night. He found himself watching the prince more carefully during the day, looking for signs of how the financial pressure was affecting him. The prince seemed more relaxed since the jewelry sale. He smiled more often when greeting staff and appeared less stressed during his daily activities. Marcus was glad to see the improvement, but still felt uneasy about keeping such a significant secret. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon when Marcus was called to the head of security's office. Captain Reynolds was a stern man who had been working at the palace for 25 years. He rarely called individual guards for meetings unless something serious had happened. "Sit down, Marcus," Captain Reynolds said, his expression grave. "I've received some disturbing information that I need to discuss with you." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Had someone discovered what happened that night? Had the jewelry sale somehow been exposed? Captain Reynolds opened a file on his desk and pulled out several photographs. "These were taken by our security cameras 3 weeks ago during your night shift. They show 2 unidentified men entering and leaving the east wing of the palace." Marcus looked at the photographs and recognized the gray-haired man and his younger companion. The images were clear enough to identify their faces, though they showed the men walking quickly and trying to avoid the cameras. "Do you remember seeing these men during your patrol that night?" Captain Reynolds asked. Marcus realized he was at a crucial moment. He could lie and claim he never saw the men, which would protect Prince Alexander's secret. Or he could tell the truth and potentially expose the jewelry sale that the prince desperately wanted to keep private. "I do remember that night," Marcus said carefully. "I investigated some unusual noises and found Prince Alexander meeting with these men in his suite." Captain Reynolds leaned forward with interest. "What kind of meeting? Why didn't you report this in your patrol log?" Marcus took a deep breath. "The prince asked me to keep the meeting confidential. He said it was personal business that didn't affect palace security." The captain's expression grew more serious. "Marcus, you know that all visitors to the royal family suites must be logged and approved in advance. These men have no record of being authorized to enter the palace." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the security violation. Palace protocols existed for good reasons, and allowing unauthorized visitors could create serious safety risks. "What was the nature of their business with Prince Alexander?" Captain Reynolds asked. Marcus hesitated. He wanted to protect the prince's privacy, but he also respected Captain Reynolds and didn't want to lie outright to his superior. "They were discussing the sale of some personal items that belonged to the prince," Marcus finally said. Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "What kind of personal items?" Before Marcus could answer, there was a knock on the office door. Captain Reynolds called for the person to enter, and Prince Alexander walked into the room. Marcus was surprised to see him there and wondered if the prince knew about this investigation. "Captain Reynolds, Marcus," the prince said, nodding to both men. "I believe you're discussing the meeting I had 3 weeks ago." Captain Reynolds stood up respectfully. "Your Highness, we have security concerns about unauthorized visitors in your suite." Prince Alexander sat down and looked directly at Marcus. "I've decided to tell Captain Reynolds the truth about what happened. You shouldn't have to protect my secrets at the cost of your job." Marcus felt relieved, but also worried about what would happen when the full truth came out. Prince Alexander turned to Captain Reynolds. "The men in those photographs are jewelry experts who were helping me sell some pieces from my grandmother's collection. I asked Marcus to keep the meeting confidential because I didn't want news of the sale to become public." Captain Reynolds looked confused. "Why would you need to sell the former queen's jewelry? And why conduct the meeting secretly at night?" The prince sighed and explained the royal family's financial difficulties, just as he had told Marcus 3 weeks earlier. Captain Reynolds listened carefully, his expression growing more understanding as he learned about the budget cuts and mounting expenses. "I had no idea the situation was so serious," Captain Reynolds said. "But, Your Highness, allowing unauthorized visitors into the palace creates security risks. These men could have been anyone." Prince Alexander nodded. "You're absolutely right, and I apologize for not following proper procedures. I was so focused on maintaining privacy that I overlooked important security protocols." Captain Reynolds turned to Marcus. "You were put in an impossible position, following orders from a royal family member while also maintaining security procedures." Marcus felt grateful that both men understood the difficult situation he had faced. I tried to balance my loyalty to the prince with my responsibilities as a guard. The conversation was interrupted by another knock on the door. This time, a young palace assistant entered with an urgent message for Prince Alexander. Your Highness, there's a journalist at the main gate asking questions about the former queen's jewelry collection. She claims to have information about recent sales. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How could a journalist have learned about the secret jewelry sale? Had one of the buyers leaked information to the media? Prince Alexander's face went pale. What kind of questions is she asking? The assistant checked his notes. She's asking about whether any pieces from the former queen's collection have been sold recently, and she wants to know why the sales weren't announced publicly. Captain Reynolds immediately switched into crisis management mode. Your Highness, we need to decide how to handle this situation quickly. If this story becomes public without proper preparation, it could create significant problems. Prince Alexander stood up and began pacing around the small office. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Once the media gets involved, everything becomes complicated. Marcus realized that his discovery of the jewelry sale was about to become much bigger than anyone had expected. A secret that had been contained to just a few people was now at risk of becoming national news. Do we know how the journalist learned about the sale? Marcus asked. Prince Alexander shook his head. The buyers promised complete discretion, but information has a way of spreading, especially when valuable items are involved. Captain Reynolds picked up his phone. I need to contact the palace press secretary immediately. We need to prepare an official response before this story grows larger. As Captain Reynolds made his call, Prince Alexander sat down next to Marcus. I'm sorry you've been pulled into all of this. When I asked for your discretion 3 weeks ago, I never imagined it would lead to a media investigation. Marcus appreciated the prince's apology, but was more concerned about what would happen next. What will you tell the media if they publish the story? Prince Alexander considered this question carefully. I suppose we'll have to tell the truth about our financial situation. It's not ideal, but lying to the media would make things much worse if they discovered additional details. Captain Reynolds finished his phone call and turned back to them. The press secretary is preparing a statement. She wants to meet with you immediately, Your Highness, to discuss the best way to present this information. As they prepared to leave Captain Reynolds's office, Marcus wondered how his simple discovery would affect the royal family and the palace staff. Would the public be understanding about the financial difficulties, or would they be angry about the secret sale of beloved national treasures? Over the following hours, Marcus watched as the palace transformed into a center of intense activity. Staff members hurried through the hallways carrying documents and making urgent phone calls. The press secretary met with Prince Alexander for over 2 hours, preparing for the media storm they expected to face. By evening, the palace released an official statement explaining that Prince Alexander had sold some inherited jewelry pieces to help manage estate expenses. The statement emphasized that the sales were legal and that the prince had the right to dispose of his inherited property as he saw fit. The media response was mixed. Some newspapers criticized the royal family for selling national treasures without public notice. Others were more sympathetic, understanding that maintaining historic palaces required enormous expenses and that the royal family was trying to be financially responsible. Marcus followed the news coverage closely, feeling a strange connection to the story since he had been present when it all began. Most of the media reports were fairly accurate, though some contained exaggerations and speculation that made the situation sound more dramatic than it really was. A week after the story broke, Prince Alexander called Marcus to his office for a private meeting. The prince looked tired but seemed relieved that the secret was finally out in the open. I wanted to thank you personally for how you handled this entire situation, Prince Alexander said. You could have reported the meeting immediately and avoided all complications. Instead, you showed discretion and loyalty. Marcus appreciated the recognition, but felt he had simply done what seemed right at the time. "I'm glad the truth is finally public, Your Highness. Keeping secrets is more difficult than I expected." Prince Alexander smiled. "The media attention has been challenging, but it's also brought some unexpected benefits. Several wealthy donors have contacted us offering to help preserve the palace's historical artifacts. Some have even offered to loan us money at favorable rates." This news surprised Marcus. "So the publicity might actually help solve your financial problems?" The prince nodded. "It appears so. People care more about preserving royal history than I realized. The negative publicity has been balanced by genuine support from citizens who want to help maintain the palace." Marcus felt relieved that his discovery of the hidden jewels had ultimately led to positive outcomes. The former queen's jewelry had been sold to help preserve the palace, and the public attention had brought additional resources to continue that preservation work. As Marcus left the prince's office that day, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that night 3 weeks ago. He had started as a simple palace guard doing routine patrols. Now he was someone who had witnessed important royal family decisions and helped protect significant secrets during a crucial period. The former queen's hidden jewels were gone, sold to a private collector overseas, but their sale had served the purpose the queen had intended when she left them to her grandson. They had helped preserve the royal family's heritage during a time of financial difficulty. Marcus returned to his regular duties with a new understanding of the complex challenges facing the people he protected. The palace looked the same from the outside, but Marcus now knew about the difficult decisions and private struggles that happened behind its golden doors. The story of the palace guard who discovered hidden jewels had ended, but Marcus's role as a trusted member of the royal household was just beginning. He had proven his loyalty during a crisis, and that loyalty would be remembered for years to come.